In 2008 and again in 2012, a soft-spoken congressman from Texas stood on a presidential debate stage and said things that sounded, at the time, extreme. And the Federal Reserve, the dollar is being destroyed. Debt will hollow out the republic. Foreign intervention will bankrupt us. Inflation is a hidden tax. That man was Ron Paul. At the time, he was dismissed as fringe. Cable news rolled their eyes. Republicans thought he was unelectable. Democrats thought he was dangerous. But here we are. And let's go claim by claim, not emotionally, but empirically. First, the Federal Reserve creates bubbles. Paul warned that artificially low interest rates would create asset bubbles, malinvestment, and eventual crisis. In 2001, the federal funds rate was cut aggressively after the dot-com crash. In 2003 and 4, it stayed historically low. And what followed? The housing bubble, then 2008, and after 2008, the response wasn't reform, it was more intervention. Quantitative easing, zero rates, balance sheet expansion from under $1 trillion to nearly $9 trillion at its peak. The institution he criticized, the Federal Reserve, became the dominant force in asset pricing. Stocks surged, real estate surged, private equity boomed, SPACs, crypto, meme stocks. And then the fastest rate hiking cycle in modern history, bank failures in 2023, commercial real estate stress, regional banking instability. You don't have to agree with his prescription to admit he correctly identified the cycle. Artificial credit expansion, first. Asset inflation, second. Instability, third. And then bailouts. That's not ideology. That's the chart. For decades, Ron Paul said persistent deficits would eventually overwhelm the currency. Deficits don't matter until they do. And in 2008, U.S. debt was about $10 trillion. Today, it's closer to $40 trillion. Interest expense is now one of the largest line items in the federal budget, rivaling defense spending. Neither party reversed it. Not under Bush, not under Obama, not under Trump, not under Biden, and not under Trump again. The warning wasn't that the system collapses overnight. The warning was structural decay. When debt compounds faster than GDP, you either inflate it away, default, or suppress rates and distort capital allocation. These are the historical outcomes. And what are we doing now? Running trillion-dollar deficits in peacetime. That's exactly what he warned about. And so inflation is a hidden tax was another of his claims. Let's examine. In 2011, when CPI was quiet, Paul said inflation wasn't gone. It was embedded in monetary expansion. For a decade, critics mocked that view. Then in 2021 to 2023, it happened. The highest CPI prints in 40 years. Whether you blame supply chains, stimulus, or energy policy, the monetary base expansion of 2020 was unprecedented in modern U.S. history. Trillions created in months. Paul's framework was simple. If you expand money faster than production, prices eventually adjust. Milton Friedman said it differently. Paul said it politically. But the mechanism is the same, and that leads us to claim number 4. Foreign intervention has costs. For years, Paul opposed overseas entanglements. He argued they were unconstitutional, destabilizing, and financially unsustainable. After 2 decades in Afghanistan and Iraq, the U.S. spent trillions. The geopolitical results remained debated, and the fiscal cost is not. Interest on war borrowing compounds like any other debt. His position wasn't isolationism for its own sake. It was a balance sheet argument. Empires historically fail not just militarily, but financially. Rome, Britain. He studied history. He wasn't guessing. Which brings us to his 5th claim. The dollar's reserve status is not permanent. Paul frequently warned that reserve currency status could erode the U.S. if it abused its monetary privilege. For decades, the dollar remained dominant, and it still is, but trends matter. Central banks have increased gold reserves. That means they don't trust us. Energy trade discussions increasingly reference non-dollar settlement. It means they don't trust the dollar. Sanctions policy has accelerated alternative payment systems. It means they don't trust the dollar. None of this means collapse tomorrow, but it does mean the privilege is not unconditional. And that was his argument, which brings us to his sixth point about gold. Paul consistently advocated sound money and criticized fiat expansion. Gold, for most of the 2010s, went nowhere. Critics pointed to that as proof he was wrong. But zoom out. Gold is not a growth asset. It's a tail risk hedge. It's a monetary barometer. When trust in policy weakens, it responds. What have we seen gold do lately? Whether you agree with gold standard or not, the debate he forced was about discipline. What constrains policymakers? If the answer is nothing, then his concerns were not irrational. So let's examine where he was not fully right. To be serious, we have to acknowledge nuance. The dollar did not collapse. Hyperinflation did not occur. The system did not implode in 2012. The U.S. economy proved more resilient than many hard money advocates expected. Technology, productivity, global demand for dollars, these extended the runway. But extending the runway is not the same as disproving the trajectory. So now the real question. Was Ron Paul right about timing? Not always. Was he right about incentives? No, increasingly, yes. He understood that politicians prefer short-term spending over long-term restraint. Central banks prefer intervention over liquidation. And voters reward benefits more than discipline. Those incentives haven't changed, not one bit. And incentives drive outcomes. So why was he marginalized? Paul wasn't ignored because he lacked logic. He was ignored because his solutions were disruptive. Audit the Fed, end corporate bailouts, cut military spending, reduce entitlement growth. Those ideas threaten entrenched power, left and right. It's easier to call someone extreme than debate structural reform. But now we come to the quiet vindication. Today, even mainstream analysts discuss fiscal sustainability, central bank balance sheet normalization, currency debasement, and debt spiral dynamics. These were once labeled far fringe. Now, they're conference panel topics. History has a strange way of normalizing yesterday's radicals. So, saying Ron Paul was right about everything is provocative, but here's the measured conclusion. He was directionally correct about the structural weakness of a debt-dependent, fiat-managed superpower. He understood that monetary expansion masks imbalances. It doesn't solve them. He understood that math, eventually and always, wins. The debate is no longer whether those pressures exist. The debate is how they resolve. And on that question, his warnings are no longer theoretical. They're embedded in the balance sheet. Come back our next time on Monday when we examine these structural balance sheet points. As always, take care of yourself and each other and build that stack.